These Violent Delights. Epilogue. The workers' strike was a failure, the maid said. But that is to be expected. Juliet gritted her teeth, placing the food she had gathered from the kitchen into the basket she had set out. The sky had turned dark, and she had long scrubbed the blood that stained her hands from the events earlier in the day. When she had returned to her house, her relatives had not even known where she had gone, had not even known she had nearly been caught in the riots that decimated Nancy. The riots had not lasted long after Juliet vacated. As soon as the police forces came barreling through, aided by the gangsters in mass numbers, it was not a fair fight at all. The workers would return to their factory jobs tomorrow morning. Those who had killed their bosses would receive a jail term. That was that. Juliet had a feeling the communists would not be deterred so easily. This was only the beginning of their revolts. Anyway, the maid said gingerly, your parents are asking if you'll be at dinner. They seek Miss Kathleen and Miss Rosalind, too. Juliet shook her head. I have an errand to run. I'll be back within the hour. Let my parents know, would you? The maid nodded. And your cousins? I sent Kathleen out on a task. She's to be excused, too. Perhaps Juliet had said it in a tone that revealed her confusion, or perhaps the words themselves were enough to incite curiosity. The maid tilted her head, noted the sole name, and asked, What about Miss Rosalind? Kathleen shook her head with a shrug. Kathleen said she didn't want Rosalind going with her, so Rosalind is still up in her room. You may wish to ask for yourself. Very well. The maid bobbed her head and hurried to her task. Juliet, sighing, closed her basket tightly and set off too. Kathleen wrinkled her nose, surveying the state of the bund. She had been warned about the corpse, about the insects floating in the water, and the bullet holes studded in the most bizarre places, but seeing it for herself was another matter. What a mess. Kathleen spun in a slow circle, grimacing as her shoes came down on the insects lying dead on the pavement. She said it would be where the dead man is, Kathleen called, waving her arm to direct the group of scarlet men Juliet had assigned to help her. Get looking. Their task? Juliet wanted a fist-size insect, one that she had said remained upon a wharf along the Huangpu River. For the sake of science, Juliet had claimed. Really, Kathleen wondered if it was to have her cousin something concrete in front of her, something that confirmed this madness was over, and Juliet had done what she had needed to do, and it had been worth it. Should we, move the corpse first? Kathleen grimaced. She peered down at the wharf, at Kiren in his slumped form, wholly human now, and very, very dead. Leave him be for now, Kathleen said quietly. Start searching. The men nodded. Kathleen helped, towing around the wharf, and kicking some of the smaller insects down in the water. The insects floated, all of their little dead bodies and exterior shells lumped together in the river, drifting about in groups, resembling oil atop cold soup. Miss Kathleen, one of the men called. Are you sure it's this wharf? The giant insect was not something that should have been hard to spot, but it was nowhere to be found. She said it was the one with the corpse, Kathleen replied. I don't see any other corpse on any other wharf. Perhaps Miss Juliet was mistaken? Another Scarlet tried. How could she mistake the retrieval of a giant insect? Kathleen muttered, perplexed. Still, there was no use searching any further if it was not here. Perhaps it had been crushed underfoot, so harshly that it was nothing more than specks of dust now, invisible to their searching eye. Kathleen sighed. Never mind, she said. She pointed to the corpse. Move him out? The men hurried to comply. Left to her own devices, Kathleen took one last inventory of the scene, eyeing the bloodstains where the wharf started. She nearly missed it, but under an overturned wooden box she spotted a briefcase, lying atop yet another small clump of dead insects. Let's have a look at you, Kathleen muttered, pulling the briefcase free. Without thinking, she clicked it open, but she clicked it the wrong way, causing the lid to immediately flap out the other direction and spill forth its contents. The items hit the floor with a thud, drawing a concerned shout from the Scarlets nearby. Don't worry, Kathleen called out quickly. She dropped to her crouch and hurried to clean up the clutter. I am clumsy. She shuffled through the papers, snagging them before they could blow away with one hand, but before she could slot them back into the briefcase, her eye caught a letter at the very top, one that was postmarked with copy, signaling the paper to be a receipt of something that Paul had sent out. At the top corner, the address of the sendee placed the destination of the letter in the French concession. Kathleen scanned the short message, and at once, in utter and abject horror, she dropped everything in her arms again. The basket dangling in her arm, Juliet knocked on the door in the scarlet safe house, glancing over her shoulder. She felt assured that she had not been followed. She had checked every 3 steps on her way here, but still she turned anyway, ruling out any chance. Shuffling came from within the apartment. The sound was loud. The motion immediately drifted in Juliet's direction due to the tiny size of the apartment and the low squat ceiling. "Hurry up," Juliet called, banging on the door again. "I don't have all day." The door swung open. Marshal Seho raised an eyebrow. "Don't you?" "I'm a busy person," Juliet said firmly. She motioned for him to step back so she could enter and shut the door firmly behind her. This was a safe house rarely used, so rarely, given its location in the poorest parts of the city, that it did not have running water, nor any amenities past a bed. It did, however, have a deadbolt on the door and a convenient window for jumping, should the occasion arise. It did provide a place where no one would come looking. "Did you bring me water?" Marshall asked. "I've been so damn thirsty, Juliet." Juliet brought out the giant canister of water, tossing it onto the table so that it made an unsavory clatter, daring Marshall to say anything more. He grinned. "I also brought food," Juliet said, "because I do not wish for you to starve to death." Marshall peered into the basket, inspecting the little bags. "Only oranges? I prefer apples." Juliet sighed. "For a dead man," she muttered, "you sure are annoying." "Speaking of which..." Marshall wandered off, then plopped down on a rickety chair by the wall. He folded his arms across his chest, wincing imperiously when it pulled on his fresh wound. "When can I resurrect?" It had been a gamble on Juliet's part, a matter of timing, a matter of trust, in Marshall, that he would know what she was trying to have him do, and in Lauren's, in believing the serum she had stolen would really work as he did. It had been a matter of framing her sleight of hand when she pulled that jar from her pocket, when she tugged Marshall's hand away from his bullet wound and shoved the jar into his palm with the lid off. A matter of hitting him so he would collapse with his arms over his face, unseen when he drank it. A matter of taking the bullets out of her pistol so it fired only with the sound, stopping the barrel from pushing a second bullet into Marshall. Then had been a matter of pure luck, of Juliet running into the main office and finding one doctor who had not evacuated, who was sorting through her filing cabinet with no concern about the workers flooding the hallways. Of Juliet convincing the doctor to operate on Marshall despite his lack of heartbeat, hauling his body into the emergency surgery room right before the protesters spotted them in the adjacent corridor, and chaining down those doors until the workers got tired and left the wing of the hospital. The bullet that Tyler fired came out quickly, having only embedded itself shallowly at the skin of Marshall's ribs, and the doctor stitched Marshall up. Juliet had promised her money to keep her quiet, but the doctor had wrinkled her nose, not even knowing who Juliet was. "Give me some time," Juliet said quietly. "Lie low until I can figure out what to do with Tyler, until he believes entirely that I was merely tricking Roma." Marshall narrowed his eyes then. "How much of it was a trick?" Juliet looked away. "Is this really the time for defending your fellow brother in arms?" "I'm a dead man, darling. What's the harm in answering the question?" What was the harm? Only her dignity. "None of it, Marshal Seho," Juliet said. She wiped her eye quickly. "I didn't have to save you. I could have shot you right there through the head." "But you saved me," Marshall said, "because you love him." Juliet made a frustrated noise at the back of her throat. "Don't say it like that. Don't be so loud." Marshall gestured around as if to demand, "Who's listening?" Nobody. Nobody was listening. Nobody would hear this confession of Juliet except a dead man walking, who would take it nowhere. "And you love him enough to have him hate you." "He should hate me," Juliet replied tiredly. "I killed his mother." "Personally?" Marshall asked, knowing the answer. "No." Juliet looked down at her hands. There was a scratch at the side of her wrist. She had no idea how it got there. But I gave him them her location with malice. I may as well have held the knife. Marshall stared forward at her, unspeaking for a long while. There was pity in his gaze, but Juliet found that she did not quite mind. Pity for Marshall Seho did not feel prickly. It felt a little warm, a little kind. Before you leave me again, Marshall said after a pause. In such a rush, as you did earlier while I was still bleeding through my bandages, I have one request. It might have been her imagination, but she thought his voice grew a little fainter. Juliet frowned. Go on. Marshall Seho's gaze flickered away. Benedict. You can't, Juliet replied immediately, knowing what the request was without need for elaboration. It hadn't been her imagination after all. Just one more person in on the secret makes this 100 times more dangerous. Juliet imagined Tyler finding out that Marshall was alive. She imagined him going on a crusade to figure out where Marshall was, hurting everyone who might have held the location. She didn't think Benedict liked her very much, but she would not let Tyler hurt him. I may have to hide for months, Marshall said, his arms coming around his middle. You will have to believe I am dead for months. Juliet's heart clenched. I'm sorry, she whispered. But as a favor to me, please let Benedict Montagov believe it. He must. The floorboards groaned. The walls and ceiling blocks creaked, shifting with the howl of the wind outside. A small eternity passed with Juliet's breath held before Marshall finally nodded. His lips thinned. It won't be long, Juliet assured him, pushing the basket of food forward. I promise. Marshall nodded again, this one to show his acknowledgement of her promise. When she left him, shutting the door after her with a quick click, Marshall was staring pensively out the window, squinting through a crack in the weakly boarded-up glass. Juliet returned to the streets, to the hustle and the bustle, and the loud anarchy. The sky was dark, and the day had been long, but the city central had already returned to business per usual, to vendors selling their wares and merchants screaming their prices, like a monster had not torn a warpath through it hours ago. And to gangsters lurking in each corner, their eyes pinned to Juliet as she walked by. Miss Kai! With a frown, Juliet paused and turned, finding a messenger running toward her. He approached vaguely familiar as he approached, but it was not until he handed her a note with Kathleen's handwriting that she recognized him as the man she had sent to the Bund. Did you find what I had asked for? Juliet asked. There was no giant insect, the messenger reported, but Miss Kathleen said to get you this as fast as possible. Frowning, Juliet took the note and flipped it open. It was not a note from Kathleen, but rather what appeared to be a copy of a letter, marked as sent by Paul Dexter, and addressed somewhere Juliet did not immediately recognize, identified only within the French concession. Juliet read the one-line scrawl, squinting to decipher the spindly, long handwriting perfectly fitting for Paul Dexter. She almost wished she hadn't. In the event of my death, release them all. The cold sweat that swept through her body was immediate. From her fingertips to her spine, she became possessed by a bone-deep terror, turning her wholly numb. What is this? Juliet demanded. What the hell is this? The messenger blinked at her, stunned. Miss Kathleen said to just give it to you. Juliet shoved the note back at him. The messenger did not react fast enough to take it before the slip of paper fluttered to the ground, dropping into the gravel like a softly landed butterfly. It was crushed underfoot at once as Juliet took a step forward. As she wheezed and inhaled into her throat and searched her surroundings desperately, trying to think. No, she whispered hoarsely. No, he couldn't have. The bells along the streets began to ring, 7 times for the hour, and in the distance a chorus of screaming tore through the city. To be continued.